So I chose to film my vulnerable story as I was hiking to the top of a mountain here in Cache Valley and doing that during a sunrise. The reason I did that is because of the symbolism that it has in my own life, and because I really love nature. It made it a little bit easier for me to share some of the things that are personal and vulnerable in that way. A little background: I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Lived out west for the first few years of my life. We moved out to Atlanta, Georgia when I was fairly young. I think I was 3 or 4. And we moved out there. We had my mom, my dad, my 4 older siblings. And when we moved out there, we had my youngest brother was born. So there's 6 kids and a mom and a dad. We moved out to Atlanta, Georgia. I was the kind of kid that just loved life. I was pretty energized and excited, just smiling all the time, pretty dang silly. And some of my favorite things to do, I just loved going down into the woods near our place, and especially if my little brother could go and build forts, pretend that we were pirates or burglars, or jump over the creek, ride our bikes down there. We had so much fun down in the woods, and it's a place of kind of peace and solace for me. So I think maybe that was one of my first things with nature, is I found it to be a place of comfort and fun and just very natural for me. So when I was, I want to say about 6 years old, my mom and my dad, they were having a hard time with their marriage. They separated. I was about 8 years old when they got divorced. And I do want to share that the impact of it on me as a young kid was pretty dramatic. It really struck me in a heavy and a hard way, where, you know, I'm young, I don't really know how to process emotion to begin with. But while all that was going on, I remember bits and pieces, and it was an emotional torrent for me. It was really a confusing and conflicting time, where I grew up in a church environment and felt like everything that I'd been taught is families are meant to stay together. Having that divorce take place really rocked my world. I didn't really know maybe how to view my own self-worth at that point. And it was something that just a seed was planted by the adversary, where I didn't believe that I had worth or value. And not all the time was that, you know, the thing I was fighting against, but that was one of the bullies in my head, was that you, Chase, are not enough. So when I was about 10 or 11 years old, my mom remarried to my stepdad. I really struggled with that transition. I wasn't very good at communicating, and I certainly wasn't good at communicating emotions. So when that transition took place, I really struggled. And during that time, I was faced with different things like being made fun of. And that's part of life. I don't think anybody gets out of life without being made fun of. But I had no belief in myself. And so I internalized all the things that people would say to me, such as, you're fat, you're slow, you're stupid, you're not good at art, you're not good at running, you're not good at music. Some of the things that I love the most. You just internalize that as a kid. You don't have a place to put that if you're not communicating and hearing what the positive voices are saying. So it all culminated to having a whole lot of self-doubt and feeling inadequate in so many ways. Now, that wasn't the only guiding force in my life. Definitely had a lot of good positive influence in there as well. But the voice that I listened to and started to accept as the guiding voice was the one that said, you're no good. And once you believe that you're no good, that you don't have value, that's when you start looking outward for fixes things just to alleviate pain. So in high school, I started looking for relationships that would be more reciprocating, and I found those in people that I would date. I was also trying to be the popular kid, the funny guy, the one who was crazy and outlandish, just very attention seeking in every decision that I made. And it wasn't to connect with other people in a true sense, it was so that I could get any level of satisfaction. I ended up having a big falling out with my mom and my stepdad when I was 17 years old, I think my senior year, and I ended up moving out of the house and decided from that point on that I wanted to just try my independence. It was like my goal to isolate myself eventually formed into leaving the home and starting out. I can't even really say on my own. I had some really awesome people that were, again, there to help take care of me and give me some guidance during a time where I was pretty lost. This is one of the most exciting parts of the hike. That's about as fast as I can run right now. Oh. It's so pretty. I know I'm only part way through telling my story at this point, but I just want to express how grateful I am for adversity and opposition. When you get to this point, you get to see all this. The contrast is it's just so powerful. This is what God wants us to experience. I got to college and didn't really have a ton of direction. Just knew that it was something that everybody else was doing, so that's what I was going to do. I had some ideas on things that I wanted to work towards and become, but I didn't really have any passion. So I get into college, don't really have a ton of belief in myself either, and I just start doing the routine. You know, that was kind of the thing, is do the steps, but I wasn't feeling any excitement or fulfillment from those things. So what I did feel excitement from was seeking my own personal pleasures. So selfish pleasures, things that led to addictions. So sexual addiction and drug addiction. So those are the two main things that were kind of like manifestations of the problems that I was facing in my life. So these inner beliefs of that I don't have value, that I'm inadequate, that I'm worthless, that I'm unlovable, that I'm unredeemable, those were my core beliefs. And because those were my core beliefs, the behaviors were never really, or rarely, were they for other people. And so this spiral downward is what it was, into this pit. The road that I was on was pure self-destruction. Getting into more and more habits that were longer lasting. The binges that I would go on would be longer and more destructive, for starting to really take over some of the things that I was doing right. So with school, my grades starting to slip and starting to fail, missing classes, missing projects, starting to miss work, showing up to work late, or just not showing up at all. And it just got to be where I was in such a place of chaos in my own life. I just felt like everything was just out of control. At the lowest point for me, I was just totally manic. I was depressed. I was anxious. I didn't trust people. I was confused. I had breakdowns during times when, I know my friends look back at those times and they're like, man, you had some jacked up stuff going on. Because I would just, start crying in the middle of hanging out, having a good time. Even the best time that I could be having, I would just break down. And so it was rock bottom for me. I got to a point where I was suicidal, and God saved me. I was so broken that I was willing to do anything. I knelt down on my knees and I prayed. And I poured it out. Every bit of my soul. God answered. At the point in my life when I felt the most alone, the most depressed, the most anxious, the most turmoil, I felt instant peace. I felt as though there was this wave of calm that came over me the moment I reached out and opened up my mouth. I felt so much love. Felt love for myself. So after feeling so much love from God, I knew that I needed to do everything that I could to change. It's not enough to just feel those things and then let it sit. I needed to change my life so I could feel more of that love and recognize it more readily. So I made a commitment to get rid of as much of the darkness in my life and replace it with light. And that process was a beautiful process. It was in no way easy, but it was so valuable in the things that I got to learn. I learned so much about myself. I learned that I could overcome things like addiction, and not because of my own strength and power, but through the grace of God. As I sought out to change something, I would rely as fully as I could on on the strength that comes through Christ, and I would feel different. Things that seemed impossible, insurmountable at first, became possible. And over time, I was able to climb out of that pit and be pulled out of that pit at the same time. It's probably more like being pulled out of the pit. But so a few of the major factors, I was able to look at the examples in my life and say, I want what they have. How are they to the point that they are at? So I just started to emulate and really just mimic until it became my own thing. And I recognized the power of making a decision, setting a goal, making a decision, and seeking after that. And learning about yourself all along in the process. And so identity became so critical and so important to me. I wanted to learn more about who I was and how to develop a better relationship with God and with myself through God. So I set a goal to, it's kind of a cool one. It's really cool. I think it's one of the coolest things I've ever done in my life. I set a goal to ride my bike across the United States and to surprise each of my siblings and family members along the way. So my family's kind of spread out across the country, and at that time we had family in Florida and Tennessee and New Mexico, Texas and Utah and Idaho. So we're all spread out, And I set my sights on starting in Portland, Oregon, on the other side of the country where I was. So in Florida, I go to the other side of the country to start, and I bike all the way home. It was amazing. Some of the best experiences of my life I had during that time. And the whole purpose of doing that trip was to connect with God through prayer, through scripture study, through reading books that are inspired, to learn about myself through coming up with a challenge, a real obstacle, and overcoming that through resilience, through self-expression, journaling, poems, photography, video, through just pondering about the things that I am interested in and the kind of man that I want to become. That was so cool. And then connection to other people. So I got to meet a lot of people along the way that were really inspiring and helped lift me beyond what I was able to do at that point. I also got to connect with my siblings and my dad, my papa along the way, and had so many good experiences from that, showing up at their house and surprising them, seeing this kid that's just sweaty, disgusting, and just giving them the biggest embrace. A lot of them are family members I hadn't seen for a year or 2 years, maybe longer, and it was really, really special having that reunion. So that was a 3-month trip that was another huge landmark in my life that helped me get the right pacing and the right foundation that I needed. When I got back, I was pretty well on fire with just the excitement and zeal for life. I set a goal to watch the sunrise every day for a full year and to watch it with as many people as I could. And the reason I wanted to do this was because of the transition that I had just experienced. It was so monumental. It was so drastic. The contrast was perfectly polar. From absolute pitch black to blindingly white, radiant light. That's what I got to experience in a spiritual sense. And so with that, I was so curious about it and wanted to understand more of what took place. So I set this goal to watch the sunrise because it's the perfect embodiment of that transition. It is a physical embodiment, this phenomenon that takes place every single day all across the world since the beginning of time. And the beautiful thing about it is everybody has some type of connection to light and dark. So anyway, I won't get off on that tangent. I'm very passionate about that, but I set this goal, and I ended up completing the goal a year later, having watched the sunrise almost every day, with 216 people, and it was awesome. It had me so excited. Again, kind of furthered the excitement for life and some of the things that I wanted to do and accomplish. And so while I was working on the sunrise goal, I ended up meeting somebody that I fell in love with and eventually asked to marry me. She and I got married, and we were together for 3 years and had a really difficult relationship. And I look back and recognize one of the major threads throughout it was that she didn't know who she was and didn't have the same type of foundation that I had. And not that I started out with that either. I had to learn and grow and develop that foundation. But instead of seeking for the right types of things to build that foundation, she went the other direction. And at some point, she reached out to me and said, we need to get a divorce. And I remember feeling that coming on and being so devastated, just brutally devastated. Imagine falling in love with somebody, caring so much about them, and I'm in no way a perfect man, and I did as good as I could in that relationship, but I look back and I think how hard it was and how broken I was from giving up the most vulnerable parts of yourself to another person, and then to be rejected. It was really, really difficult. I made a commitment to God to keep trying my best, even despite some of the pain and the raw emotion that I was feeling, even despite some of the confusion and the fears and rejection, all the doubts, everything that came flooding in because of the high emotion that I was experiencing. And as I made that commitment to keep trying my best, God gave me opportunities to succeed. And they were small victories, some of them. One of them was to move out west and to live with my sister in Utah. And I had 4 nieces there that I lived with that just took such good care of me. I remember the day that my ex-wife told me that we were going to get the final divorce letter and everything signed. I just felt so much emotion. I was so broken. And their youngest daughter, Paisley, comes knocking on the door, and she's there with her mom. I'm laying down in bed just crying to myself, and Marie says, "Hey, Paisley wants to go for a bike ride down to the gas station to get some candy. Do you want to go with her?" I love riding bikes, if that's not obvious. I love spending time outside, if that's not obvious. I love my family, if that's not obvious. That was the perfect thing to help get me out of bed when nothing else would have done it. So go spend time with my niece. We got some candy. She's got this like unicorn helmet with the little horn on the front. And I remember that was a day where God totally saved me. And it came through the form of something very simple. It was through a family member, through my niece, through my sister. I ended up having so many of those experiences during my recovery from divorce that it helped me to stay as on track as possible. And I really attribute so much of my successes in that recovery to doing group therapy with my brother-in-law Tyler. I got to learn so much about vulnerability and empathy and self-compassion and our core behaviors. I connected to other men and built a brotherhood of people that had the same type of addictions that I was trying to stay away from. And they were also doing the work that I was doing. And it felt so good to have that connection and be able to call somebody up and say, hey man, I'm struggling. I'm really struggling right now. Do you have a few minutes to talk? And to also be that person to receive those types of phone calls. That helped me in a tremendous way, having those types of connections. And then the one that I think I maybe glow the most when I talk about is falling in love with my wife, Chelsea. So Chelsea moved out west at the same time that I moved out west. She's from Florida, kind of like me. We met at FSU and knew each other briefly. We weren't really friends. We were just kind of acquaintances. But we knew each other well enough to become Facebook friends. And I saw that she moved out west. And she's about 4 years younger than me. I tried setting her up to go on a date with my little brother, who was also living out west. And it in the communication back and forth with her, I found out that she actually was not in the same part of the West that my brother was living in. So I thought she was in Utah. Turns out she was in Idaho. I was in northern Utah. I was able to reach out to her and say, hey, I need a friend. Would you be willing to go watch the sunrise with me? I connected with her after I'd gotten divorced. So the week after I got divorced, she and I watched the sunrise together in Rexburg, Idaho. It just sitting in the middle of this frozen potato field. November 8th, 2015. I remember that morning being transcendent in every kind of way. And at a point where I wasn't ready to get into a relationship, I felt God just kind of pushing me like a confident father, knowing that his son is capable of doing something, just pushing me, saying, hey, this girl is going to love you in a way that you don't even recognize right now. And that's true. Chelsea's helped me to learn so much about myself. She's helped me to feel so much unconditional love. Our dating process was phenomenal. We had some ups and downs. We had some around and rounds. We totaled a car going 80 miles an hour and rolled 2.5 times and came out unscathed. That was a miracle. We had a few emotional things within our relationship that were difficult to navigate, but by the end of a few months of being getting to know her, I knew that I needed somebody as good as her, as loving as her, as patient and thoughtful as her in my life. And she's been that example for me ever since. We've been married for going on almost 4 years now. And we've got a son named August, and we're expecting our second kid later on this year in November. I am amazed at how God is able to work such miracles in our lives. I remember when I was going through the divorce, I thought there's no chance that I'm going to be able to find a relationship where I feel love and want to give myself fully to. And with Chelsea, God led me to her, and we have that in a way that I've never had in any other relationship. I'm so grateful for the way God works miracles and gives us the experience that we need. He's able to redeem the most broken, the most lost, the most the darkest of any kind of problem that we've ever faced. And He wants that. He wants to heal us. I believe it's fully possible, and I know that it's fully possible, no matter what your situation is. In the therapy that I've gotten to do, and even with the Sunrise Goal and some of the other projects that I've worked on, I've gotten to learn so much about other people and their darkness. I've learned about the light that they've experienced, the choices that they've made. And I have such a strong testimony and witness of the ability for God to change us, to make something, to purify our hearts, to help us be whole. I'm grateful for His love for me, for His relentless nature and calling and reaching out to me and trying to bring me into His arms of love, His matchless love. I share these stories knowing that our stories have the power to bind hearts together, to lift people out of darkness, and to help us all come closer to God.